Then you Hello, you wonderful people. I'm Dracthonia, and I'm here to help you on your pursuit to your best self, one game at a time. Today, we're going to be going over that fabled and wondrous book, DM's Guide. Yes, we're finally tackling that for all of you new DMs out there. For those who don't know, the Dungeon Master's Guide is a book aimed to help you start your journey as a DM or GM or whatever you prefer to be called. And for anyone who has read it, it's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. It feels like it starts off purely to deter those who aren't prepared to be a DM. I know this isn't the intention, but it is a scary book with lots and lots of pages. So I'm here to give you the TLDR version of the DM's Guide and help you ease into DMing a little bit quicker and a little less painfully. So let's get started, shall we? This book can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how you use it. It's full of all sorts of wondrous information, and I highly recommend getting yourself a copy. However, there is also a lot of information in there that you don't need when you first start out, and it's just going to confuse you and probably put you off and probably result in you crying in a corner wondering why you volunteered yourself for such a thing. And I'm definitely not speaking from experience here at all. No. If you're anything like me, you'll start off wanting to be the best DM that you ever could be. You'll have every intention to read every single page of the DM's Guide. And then once you get your hands on this magical, wondrous book full of all of the knowledge that you could possibly need, you'll start reading it and get to about chapter 2 and want to scream. It happens. We all start off with good intentions. But what would have been handy is if someone had told me, look, if you're going to use a campaign book, you're not going to need X, Y, and Z, and these are the important pieces to actually look at. So that's what I'm here to do for you, so that you don't have to go through the entire spiral of despair that I went through. So with this video, I'd really like to focus on a quick guide to the book in general, and later on I will be doing a series on each chapter in more detail for you. So we're going to do a quick rundown of all the chapters, and lucky for you, I created another freebie for you that gives you the key information that you'll need from the DM's Guide as a newbie starting to DM. So join our Discord if you would like to get a piece of that action. Do remember to like, subscribe, and obey if you want to keep up to date with the new series that is coming your way. As a newbie DM, I started out feeling very intimidated by all of the information, all the rules, and how much people would judge me for failing miserably at this endeavor. It's common, it's normal, it is human to worry and panic and have performance anxiety about such things. This is why I want to give you guys an easier route to understanding all you need to know for setting up your first game. I'm going to base this mostly on people who are following a campaign book, but obviously this information is also useful for people who want to do homebrews. All right, part 1. This contains 2 chapters, chapter 1 and 2. This section, I feel, is here to purely terrify every new DM, especially those with anxiety from ever playing the game ever. But it's also full of useful little bits of information that you can use. However, it's not aimed at newbie DMs. This section is here to walk you through building your own world, setting up basic core assumptions about your world, like does it have magic? Does it basically spend most of its time squabbling over toilet paper? Does it have a religious system? It covers everything from what gods you need to put in place to setting up the multiverse, which, as you can imagine, is really not something that you want to be worrying about when you're setting up your first campaign in a small village called Peterborough and are wanting to basically try and figure out why Dave the bartender's dog has gone missing. There are important pieces of information in this section, but if you're following a campaign book, gloss over this section, okay? The only important information that you really need to focus on is maps. They're good. Think about using them. Think of purposes for all of your elements, such as your settlements, what purpose factions have, what purpose introducing a god has. If it's not got a purpose, don't introduce it. This also goes over key aspects of what style of gameplay you want to have. Are your party more of a fighty group, or are they more about chatting the ever-living shit out of the ear of every single NPC that you have created just to fill out a pub area? Whichever floats their boat. This chapter has a bunch of really handy tables that you can use to randomly roll up adventures based around your player character's levels, so that you're not throwing them into party destroying situations or giving them a really good time. Part 2 is chapters 3 to 6. This section helps you craft your story. Again, if you are running a campaign book sorts this out for you, so you don't need to worry about this stuff. But if you're wanting to flesh out an idea that you already have, this will help you do it. The key components of these chapters really cover things like how to write a good story, how to plan your story, how to make NPCs, environments and how they can affect your adventures, and things like traps. Traps are really fun. So, starting out with a good story. How to start out with a good story. The key to a good story is giving everyone something that they'll enjoy, whether that's a big bad, a purpose, a good twist in their story, interesting characters, and obviously a solid beginning, middle, and end. Basic story structuring that you can find in any book about writing fiction anywhere in the world. One key piece of information that is super handy in this is plan your story around the villain. Yes, I know. I mean, for me, that seems like a great idea. I love villains. Villains are the spice of life. But it seems a bit odd to everyone else. The key to this is if you're planning your story around your villain, you know what your villain is doing at any point during the story, irrespective of what your adventurers are doing. This means that you can keep things in motion and have your story laid out without anything that the player characters are doing throwing you into a chaos that you have no idea how to deal with, which will happen because player characters are going to be that way. So focus on planning your story around your villain. Then you establish your player character's goals in the general world that you're building. Setting party goals means that you are giving them an aim and they're not going to wander around completely lost trying to buy puppies in the local pet shop. Then you establish your key NPCs and your key points of interest, such as settlements or dungeons, places that hold key events or key pieces of information. Then fill out the rest with some random encounters and you have your story. The rest of this story is up to your players. This is why you leave big obvious gaps, because your players are supposed to be telling the story. You're just giving them little points to get between to get to the end point of the story. So sprinkle it with some spice and some flavor and pour in your creative juices and then let your players go with the flow. Next, this chapter covers how you need to think about two types of NPC. The ones that your player characters are probably maybe going to fight, and the ones that they're not supposed to fight and will probably try and kill. Basically, you have your bog standard filler characters that are there just for depth of place, or to provide very basic information, or to sell things. Basically convenience NPCs, if you will. And then you've got your important information, key to story NPCs. The book advises that you don't need to roll up any information for your filler NPCs. I disagree. In my experience, player characters are going to try and kill your NPCs. It's like they are drawn to it, like a moth to a flame, that the flame is then setting the entire bar on fire and killing everyone in the town. It's inevitable. So what I advise is that you roll up some bog standard stats that you can throw onto any generic NPC ever, so that when your player characters inevitably try to either romance them or kill them, you already have the stats handy, rather than having to try and roll them up on the fly. For the filler NPCs, I advise giving them a name, such as Bob. He's a bartender, and he has a nose like a monkey's arse. Something memorable. Something that will stick out to your player characters, and they will remember fondly Bob and his bar, and how they then murdered him and all of his children. Moving on. Key NPCs, they definitely need stats and more depth than your filler NPCs. So, make sure to give them mannerisms, history, flaws, secrets, and give them a profession. Make them substantial, so that you know how to deliver their lines, or give them flavour along the road. Or inevitably, when your player characters recruit them to their group as cannon fodder, you know exactly what spells they need to do when they're thrown into battle. Next, these chapters cover environments and how they add spice to your campaign and your travelling and your dungeons. Environments can have status effects, it can introduce hazards. It helps you flesh out travelling montages that go on for like 20 days that you have no idea how to fill. And it's fun. It's fun to watch your player characters struggle through bogs and be incapacitated by ankle-deep mud. You've got to get your kicks where you can. Environments can affect dungeons too, so it's important information to maybe have a look at when you have time, or when you inevitably get asked about the status effects that water has when it is of a specific temperature in a bog, and etc. Traps.
It's a trap!
Everyone loves traps. Traps are there to give the DM little kicks and giggles when your party inevitably stumble across them after not having a proper perception check. This is where the real joy of DMing comes in. And you can cackle maniacally as your party suffers minor damage. The key components of traps is to know how they're triggered, what your party's passive and active perception is, so that they can try and disarm it, and inevitably, when they fail to disarm it, what damage they take. And guys, always damage responsibly. It's important. It's important to always damage your party responsibly, unless they have really, really angered you, and then you can go all balls to the wall. Chapter 7 is everyone's favourite chapter because it's all about the loot. This is a chapter full of all the fun items that you can litter across your campaign, full of all the shinies and all of Vecna's various pieces. I mean, I'm not biased, but those are the interesting parts. Your player characters can only attune to 3 magical items, so choose wisely. And, you know, when inevitably they pick up all 3 magical items, then you need to pepper a bunch of random crap into the campaign to keep it spicy. Then you can make your own and make them fun. I mean, if you're me, make them lewd. But you know, you can make them fun or silly or just curse items. That they're fun too. Every campaign needs a belt of gender change to piss off that party member that is really, really sold on their toxic masculinity. If you want to create your own lute, go to page 284, which has a handy guide to creating your very own magical item, or pick from the random list that is there. There are also tables there that help you roll up the lute that is appropriate for the level of your player characters and pick out items that are of the correct level. Also, in the freebie that I have created for you guys, I've compiled the information for rarity, player level, the bonus you may wish to add to any item that you are creating yourself, and any spell bonuses to add based on the character level. So I hope this is handy and helps you in your creative endeavors and creating Frankenstein's monster of loot. Have fun. Chapter 8 should be chapter 1. This is the most important chapter of the entire book. You should read it. It is extremely handy. It, in fact, covers all of the stuff that I would have thought would have been the gentle introduction into being a DM. It covers things like the etiquette of your game, dice rolls, player types, and all of the checks that you need to worry about. All of those things that you're probably going to forget. The ability checks, the saving throws, the criticals, the difficulty levels. It's basically info galore. This is the kind of stuff that you really need to focus on. So read this chapter. If you don't read any other chapters, read this chapter. This also covers the abilities and what they're appropriate for. For example, strength. Did you know? It's actually not just for doing things that need to be pushed or pulled or smashed or just general strengthy things, but also whether or not your player can jump that gap over the lava that is also full of piranhas. But also things like constitution and how, yes, it may cover how healthy your character is or how much stamina they have, but also determines how much your player can drink. Chapter 9 is where all the fun experimental shenanigans happen. This is where you have all the alternative rules for things like honor and sanity and proficiency and initiative, and basically throwing a bit of spice into the rules, or maybe changing that one rule that you don't really enjoy or don't really understand. This is also where the golden information of how to create your own monsters and your own spells and your own items are. You can create your own races, your own classes, your own backgrounds. It's where it walks you through doing all of the fun little bits that you wanted to do initially, but were scared off doing because you read through chapter 1 to 6. This is, I feel, one of the more interesting chapters, but not one of the most essential. So if you have time, feel free to have peruse. Maybe look at making your own monster to throw in to spice up your campaign, but don't worry too much about it. At the end of the day, the book is here to help you. It's not there to traumatize you or scare you away from doing things. It's just not as user-friendly as it could be. The player handbook has been made a lot more user-friendly in 5th ed, but the DM's guide, because it has a lot of information to get across and it's tackling one of the harder parts of playing D&D in general, it isn't as user-friendly as it could be. So I'm hoping that this has helped you clarify what to read and what not to read when you first start out. But as I said, I will be going into more detail in future videos. I'll be covering each chapter in more detail, and for now I do have that freebie in the Discord for your use to help you out. So I hope that this has been useful. I hope that it has clarified some things for you. If you have any questions about each chapter that you would like to ask me, do comment down below, and why not tell me about a particular chapter that you found interesting or useful. and let me know if that freebie has been of use to you in your new campaign. But good luck, DMs of the future. I hope that this has helped you in your endeavor to DM in the new year, and I will see you guys soon. Say bye, guys. Go, blah, 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 blah. Rewind.